As an African-American sculptor in the first half of the 20th century and participant in the Harlem Renaissance, Augusta Savage helped African-American artists get representation where they previously could not and formed venues where underrepresented artists could have their work seen by many. As an African-American sculptor growing up less than 30 years after the American Civil War, there are probably very few African-American artists from the past that Augusta Savage could look up to. The result of this being that most of Savage's influence were her contemporaries in the Harlem Renaissance, such as sculptor Medieval Warwick Fuller, who sculpted maquette for Ethiopia Awakening at around the same time Savage began her studies at Cooper Union. If there were someone from the past who Savage needed to look upon for some inspiration, it would have been Edmonia Lewis, who is considered the first professional African American sculptor. Lewis's work usually drew on both her African American and Native American heritages, leading to works such as her Hagar sculpture, which is sometimes regarded as her greatest surviving work. Hagar leans on Lewis's African American heritage as she uses the Old Testament figure of Hagar, who was an Egyptian servant to the wife of Abraham and was later banished by her, to give a depiction of Black Africa, Egypt, and the courageous mother of a line of African kings, Hagar. Savage's best-known work is probably her sculpture, The Harp, which she created for 1939's New York World's Fair. Her goal with this sculpture was to create something that symbolized the musical contributions of African Americans, resulting in her basing the sculpture on James Weldon Johnson's poem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, whose first line contained what was considered the Negro national anthem. The harp stood 16 feet tall, with 12 youthful African Americans replacing the strings of an actual harp, and an arm and hand of God replacing the sounding board. A boy kneeling at the front of the sculpture offers music in place of the sounding board's pedal. The sculpture was well received, with over 5 million people seeing it, according to art curator Wendy Ikimoto, but was destroyed as Savage had neither the funds to cast nor store the sculpture. Another one of Savage's more popular sculptures was her 1929 bust named Godman. There is a disagreement on whether the sculpture depicts a homeless boy living on the street or Savage's nephew. Through the use of a wrinkled shirt, a cap, and an expression that gives the feeling that the boy has experienced much more than others of the same age, the sculpture depicts a young boy who appears to have suffered great hardship as a result of his homelessness. The release of Godman was important for Savage as it earned her a Julius Rosenwald Fellowship in 1929, allowing her to study abroad in Paris. Only 12 of Savage's sculptures, including Godman, have survived until the present, meaning most of Savage's lasting legacy is from the work she had done to bring African Americans into an American artistic community that was lacking input from the Black community, and her efforts to teach others. Savage's break into the American artistic community began with her becoming the first African American member of the National Association of Women Painters and Sculptors in 1934. In 1937, she then became the first director of the Harlem Community Arts Center, which helped the development of many young African American artists. When the center closed in 1939 because of World War II, Savage opened the Salon of Contemporary Negro Art to try and make sure African Americans still had a place to display their art in Harlem. Savage's teaching efforts began with the establishment of the Savage Studio of Arts and Crafts in 1932, where she taught African Americans, then had them display at her gallery. She taught many artists, including Charles Alston, who would later become popular for their works during the Harlem Renaissance at her school. Alston is an important part of Savage's lasting legacy as he created a bust of Martin Luther King Jr., which became the first piece of African American art to reside in the White House. The majority of Augusta Savage's sculptures may not have survived until present day, but the effort she put forth to teach African Americans about art and make sure they have a place in the American art community should not be forgotten.